Have you experienced that suffocating weight of worry that seems to grow heavier each day? Do you feel spiritually exhausted, as if your soul is carrying burdens too heavy to name? These are not just feelings, they are signs that your mind needs purification and your spirit desperately needs rest. What you are about to discover are not human opinions or modern self-help techniques. These are practices revealed directly through the mystical experiences of Saint Faustina Kowalska, practices that Jesus himself taught her as she walked through her own valleys of mental anguish and spiritual desolation. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss more teachings and wisdom from Saint Faustina. Activate the notification bell to join thousands who are transforming their spiritual lives. Saint Faustina knew mental torment intimately. In her diary, she describes moments when her mind felt like a dark labyrinth, when thoughts attacked her like arrows, when memories wounded her repeatedly, when anxiety pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She was not immune to the struggles you face right now. She experienced the same mental chaos, the same spiritual fatigue, the same desperate need for peace. But through her intimate conversations with Jesus, she discovered something extraordinary. She learned that the mind can become either a prison of darkness or a sanctuary of light. The difference lies not in human willpower alone, but in specific spiritual practices that allow divine mercy to penetrate the chaos and restore order, silence, and supernatural rest. Imagine for a moment entering a room that has been closed for years. Dust covers every surface, cobwebs hang in corners, the air is stale and heavy. This is what your mind looks like when it accumulates worries, feeds on negative thoughts, replays old wounds, and forgets the presence of God. Saint Faustina saw this clearly in her own soul and in the souls of others. Jesus said to her, as recorded in Diary Entry 300, that a soul in peace is a heaven where he rests. But how many souls offer him only chaos? How many minds are so cluttered with anxiety that there is no room for God to breathe? The practices you are about to learn are not mere techniques. They are keys that unlock the doors of your mental prison and invite the light of mercy to flood every dark corner. Close your eyes for just a second and feel the weight you carry right now. Feel how your shoulders tense when you think about tomorrow. Notice how your mind immediately jumps to worst-case scenarios. Recognize how easily you spiral into fear. This is not how God designed you to live. Saint Faustina discovered that Jesus longs to give you something the world cannot provide: true rest for your spirit and genuine peace for your mind. But this gift requires your cooperation. It requires daily practices, small acts of surrender, moments of silence, and a willingness to let go of the control you think you have. Are you ready to learn what she discovered? Are you prepared to walk the path she walked from mental chaos to spiritual serenity? The first practice Saint Faustina learned was the morning offering of the mind. Every single day before her feet touched the floor, before the demands of the day began screaming for her attention, she would whisper a simple prayer that Jesus taught her personally. She would say, "Lord, let everything I think today glorify you." This was not just a pious statement. This was a deliberate act of detoxification. Think about it. How do you begin your day? Do you reach immediately for your phone, filling your mind with news, messages, and the opinions of others, before you have even acknowledged God? Do you start your day already anxious, mentally rehearsing problems before they even occur? Saint Faustina learned that the first thoughts of the day set the tone for everything that follows. When you offer your mind to God in those first conscious moments, you are essentially saying, "I cannot purify my own thoughts, but you can." She describes in Diary Entry 140 how this simple practice changed everything for her. She noticed that on days when she forgot this offering, her mind became a playground for the enemy. Negative thoughts multiplied, fears grew larger, worries consumed her energy. But on days when she remembered to entrust her mind to Jesus at the very beginning, something supernatural happened. Her thoughts became clearer. Peace settled over her like a gentle blanket. Problems that seemed insurmountable the night before suddenly appeared manageable in the light of morning surrender. This is not magic. This is the power of grace working in a soul that cooperates with it. When you deliberately place your mind under God's protection at dawn, you are building a spiritual fortress around your thoughts before the attacks begin. But Faustina went deeper. She discovered a second morning practice that intensified this protection. She would follow her initial offering with what she called an act interior purity. She would pray as recorded in Diary 150, "Purify my thoughts, merciful Jesus." This short prayer, repeated with sincere desire, functioned like spiritual surgery. It removed invasive thoughts that had crept in during the night. It cleansed the shadows that darkness always tries to leave behind. Think about your own experience. Have you ever woken up with your mind already filled with worry? Have you noticed how certain thoughts seem to be waiting for you the moment you regain consciousness? These are not random. They are attacks designed to steal your peace before your day even begins. Saint Faustina teaches us that we do not have to accept these thoughts as our own. We can recognize them as invasive species in the garden of our mind and immediately ask Jesus to remove them. This is detoxification in its most essential form. You are not trying to fight these thoughts with your own strength. You are not attempting to reason them away or suppress them through willpower. You are simply asking the one who created your mind to cleanse it, and he does. This practice takes less than 30 seconds, but its effects last throughout the entire day. It is like taking a spiritual shower that washes away the grime of mental pollution before it has a chance to settle and stain your soul. The third morning practice Saint Faustina embraced was what she called the initial silence. After offering her mind to God and asking for purification, she would remain completely still for a few moments without saying anything. No words, no petitions, no plans, just silence. She discovered that this brief pause allowed her soul to align itself properly, like a compass needle finding true north. In our modern world, silence has become almost unbearable. We fill every moment with noise, music, podcasts, conversations. We are terrified of being alone with our own thoughts. But Saint Faustina learned that silence is not emptiness. Silence is presence. When you create a pocket of silence at the beginning of your day, you are making room for God to speak, to guide, to correct, to encourage. She wrote in her diary that morning, "Silence straightens the soul." What a beautiful image. Throughout the night, as we sleep, our souls can become bent by dreams, by unconscious fears, by spiritual battles we are not even aware of. But silence in the morning presence of God straightens everything. It realigns our priorities. It reminds us who we are and whose we are. It puts the chaos of yesterday in perspective and prepares us for the challenges of today. This practice requires no special skill, no theological training, no mystical gifts. It simply requires you to pause, to breathe, to be still, and to allow God's presence to fill the space you have created. Can you commit to 30 seconds of silence tomorrow morning? Can you resist the urge to immediately plan, worry, or distract yourself? This single practice could transform your entire day. Write in the comments right now, "Jesus, I offer you my mind this morning." This is not just a comment. This is a public declaration of your intention. It is a spiritual marker that says you are ready to begin implementing these practices. Your testimony in the comments will encourage others who are struggling with the same mental chaos. Do not keep this light to yourself. Now let us move to the practices that Saint Faustina used throughout the day to maintain mental purity and spiritual rest. The fourth practice she learned was what she called the deposit of worries. Whenever anxiety began to rise, whenever her mind started spiraling into what-if scenarios, she would take a moment to write down exactly what was troubling her. This was not journaling for therapeutic purposes alone. This was a sacred act of surrender. After writing down her concerns, she would say with complete trust, "Jesus, you take care of this." Then she would physically close the notebook or turn away from the written words, symbolizing her release of control. This practice is profound because it acknowledges a fundamental truth about the human mind. We cannot carry everything. We were not designed to solve every problem, predict every outcome, or control every situation. When you try to hold all your worries in your mind simultaneously, you become paralyzed. Your mental energy gets consumed by endless rehearsals of problems that may never even occur. Saint Faustina discovered that Jesus actually wants you to transfer your burdens to him, but he will not force you. You must consciously choose to let go. Writing your worries down and verbally entrusting them to God creates a concrete moment of release. It is a physical and spiritual act combined. Your mind registers that you have done something, and grace rushes in to fill the space that worry previously occupied. But here is where many people stumble. They write down their worries, they pray about them, Then 5 minutes later, they pick them back up again. They mentally retrieve what they supposedly surrendered. Saint Fain warns against this in her writings. She says that true surrender means leaving the burden with Jesus and not constantly checking to see if he is handling it properly. This requires tremendous trust. It requires you to believe that God is actually more capable than you are, that his solutions are better than your contingency plans, that his timing is wiser than your urgency. Every time you feel anxiety returning about something you already surrendered, you must make a conscious choice. You can either reclaim your worry and continue carrying it yourself, or you can remind yourself that you already gave this to Jesus and refuse to take it back. The fifth practice builds on the fourth. Saint Fina learned to give a name to her suffering. She discovered that anxiety grows in the shadows of vagueness. When you cannot name what you are feeling, when you just sense a general unease or dread, fear multiplies unchecked. But when you stop and honestly identify the specific source of your mental disturbance, something powerful happens. The unnamed monster becomes a known enemy, and known enemies can be fought with specific weapons. Jesus taught her this principle directly. He said in one of their conversations that to name pain is to deliver it. When you can say, I am anxious about money, or I am fearful of losing this relationship, or I am worried about my health, you have taken the first step toward liberation. Unnamed suffering keeps you trapped in a fog where nothing is clear and everything feels threatening, but named suffering can be placed at the foot of the cross. Saint Fina would identify exactly what was disturbing her peace, and then she would say, Jesus, I give you this specific fear, this particular worry, this exact source of my mental torment. She found that Jesus responds with laser-focused mercy when we bring him specific requests rather than vague complaints. Think about your own experience. When someone asks you what is wrong and you answer everything, how can they help you? But when you say, I am struggling with this specific situation, they can offer concrete assistance. God does not need you to be specific for his sake. He already knows. He asks you to be specific for your sake so that you can clearly see what you are surrendering and clearly recognize when he answers. Throughout her day, Saint Fina practiced constant vigilance over her thoughts. This was the sixth practice she embraced. She understood that the first battlefield is always mental. Before sin manifests in action, it begins in thought. Before despair takes root in the heart, it starts as a suggestion in the mind. The enemy knows this. That is why he attacks your thoughts relentlessly. Saint Fina wrote in Diary 552 that when negative thoughts appeared, when fears whispered their lies, when darkness tried to cloud her vision, she would immediately respond with the prayer, Jesus, I trust in you. She did not wait to see if the thought would go away on its own. She did not try to analyze whether it was a reasonable fear or not. She immediately countered it with truth. This practice of immediate spiritual resistance is crucial. Many people allow negative thoughts to linger, to be examined, to be entertained. They think, maybe this thought has some validity. Maybe I should consider this possibility. But Saint Fina learned that certain thoughts do not deserve consideration. Thoughts that contradict God's promises. Thoughts that breed fear instead of faith. Thoughts that lead to despair instead of hope. These must be rejected immediately. The moment you recognize a thought is coming from darkness, you speak light. Jesus, I trust in you. This simple phrase dissolves mental fog like sunlight evaporating morning mist. It does not argue with the negative thought. It does not try to convince you that everything will be fine. It simply affirms a higher reality. Regardless of what I see or feel or fear, I choose to trust in you. The seventh practice Saint Fina incorporated was what she called the mercy pause. Every 2 to 3 hours throughout her day, she would stop whatever she was doing for just a few seconds and pray, Lord, give me your eyes. This brief interruption served multiple purposes. First, it prevented her from becoming so absorbed in tasks that she forgot God's presence. Second, it allowed her to see her circumstances from a divine perspective rather than a merely human one. Third, it reset her mental and spiritual state, preventing the gradual accumulation of stress that leads to eventual breakdown. Her spiritual director noted that these small pauses kept her heart clean and her soul awake. In our productivity-obsessed culture, the idea of pausing every few hours might seem inefficient. But Saint Fain discovered something that modern neuroscience is only now confirming. The human mind cannot maintain intense focus indefinitely without rest. When you push through without breaks, your mental clarity decreases, your decision suffers, and your emotional resilience weakens. But when you intentionally pause, even briefly, you allow your mind to recalibrate. From a spiritual perspective, these mercy pauses do something even more profound. ND. They remind you that you are not the master of your day. God is. They interrupt the illusion of self-sufficiency and reconnect you to the source of all grace. After a mercy pause, Saint Fina found that her tasks became easier, her patience increased, and her peace remained stable even in challenging situations. Here is a question for you. Can you set a simple reminder on your phone to pause every 3 hours? Can you give God 15 seconds of your attention in the middle of your busy day? This is not adding another burden to your schedule. This is creating moments of rest that will actually make everything else more effective. Saint Fina proved this in her own life. She worked hard, she served diligently, she fulfilled all her responsibilities, but she never allowed her work to disconnect her from God. These brief pauses were like anchors keeping her soul steady in the storms of daily life. The 8th practice involved something deeply painful, cleansing wounded memory. Saint Fina suffered from intrusive memories. Past hurts would replay in her mind. Old wounds would suddenly open and bleed again. Humiliation she had experienced would return to torment her. This is one of the most difficult aspects of mental purification. You cannot simply forget painful memories. Willpower alone cannot erase them. But Jesus taught her something remarkable. He said, as recorded in Diary 379, "Do not open what I have already closed with my mercy." What does this mean? It means that certain memories, certain past events, certain wounds have already been healed by God. Even if you do not feel healed, when these memories try to return and disturb your peace, you are not obligated to relive them. When a painful memory surfaced, Saint Fane would immediately pray, "Jesus, heal me in what still hurts." She did not deny the pain, she did not pretend the memory was not there, but she also did not allow memory to control her present moment. She placed it under the blood of Christ, asking him to complete whatever healing was still needed. This practice requires you to distinguish between remembering and reliving. Remembering is acknowledging that something happened. Reliving is allowing that past event to trigger the same emotional responses as if it were happening now. You can remember without reliving. You can acknowledge your past without being imprisoned by it. But this only happens when you consistently bring wounded memories to Jesus for his touch. Some memories are so deeply embedded that they require repeated surrender. You may need to bring the same memory to Jesus multiple times before you experience complete freedom. This is not a sign of weak faith. This is simply the reality of how deep some wounds go. Saint Fina herself had to surrender certain memories again and again. But each time she did, the memory lost a little more of its power, the pain became less sharp, the emotional charge decreased. Eventually, she could recall the event without experiencing the torment. This is the goal of memory purification, not to erase your past, but to neutralize its toxic effect on your present and future. If you are ready to experience true mental rest, if you are tired of being a prisoner to your own thoughts, write in the comments, "Jesus, purify my mind and rest in my soul." Let this be your prayer throughout this week. Repeat it when anxiety rises, when memories attack, when thoughts spiral out of control. Now, we come to practices specifically designed for spiritual rest. Saint Fina learned that the mind only truly rests when the spirit rests, and the spirit only rests when it finds a place where God can breathe within you. The 9th practice she embraced was cultivating an interior environment conducive to divine presence. This meant deliberately reducing noise, limiting excessive information, seeking moments of recollection, and transforming small intervals throughout her day into silent prayer. She wrote that the tired soul needs not words but presence. What a profound insight. When you are spiritually exhausted, the last thing you need is more spiritual activity, more prayers, more devotions, more religious tasks. What you need is simply to be in God's presence without agenda, without demands, without performance. How do you create this interior environment? Saint Fina offers practical guidance. First, she recommends reducing your consumption of information. In her time, this meant limiting unnecessary conversations and avoiding gossip. In our time, this means setting boundaries on social media, news intake, and the constant stream of opinions that flood our devices.